for someone. Hold that. Okay, hold it over there. Okay, listen up.
Mic check.
Mic
Mic
check.
check.
Mic check.
Mic check.
Mic check.
Okay, Richard Wolff,
Richard Wolff.
world-renowned
World-renowned
Marxist economist,
Marxist economist
is giving a talk,
abbreviated
on capitalism and crisis.
on capitalism and crisis.
So enjoy.
So enjoy.
Thank you very much. I'm also, in addition to all those other things, wet. But I'll try to make a few points in hopes that they help. First of all, Jen and I just drove up from New York City. And I want to tell you what happened there today because it's an historic shift in the way things are working. A few days ago, the mayor of New York, was given a new name. He's now known as Mubarak Bloomberg. He decided to clean the park. If you visited our great city of New York, you will know that we have some of the dirtiest subway stations on this planet. Especially in Brooklyn, that's correct. You will also notice that we have a very unusual garbage system. You put it in a bag and you put it out on the street. And during the night, the large numbers of four-footed animals that we retain in our system open the bags and screw the material around. It is a health hazard, it is disgusting, and our mayor has never done anything. But it was really important to clean Zuccotti Park. And so he had the police come in at 1 o'clock in the morning, disturb everybody, throw the people out of the park, and have some memorable moments. The bulldozers destroying the free library that had been created on one side of the park. Hurting people, arresting people, physically hurting people. No more business as usual, the police captain said, who commandeered the whole thing. In response, today, when business was supposed to begin on Wall Street, there was no business as usual. Wall Street stopped this morning. You could not get in and out of the Deutsche Bank on Wall Street. You could not get in and out of the stock exchange. The subways were shut down by the police because they couldn't figure out who to arrest. The demonstrators had adopted a brilliant policy. Demonstrators, they had let a rumor go, were to wear ties and jackets and look just like the stockbrokers. Thousands of them did it, and the police proceeded to fall right into the trap and arrest large numbers of stockbrokers who have been denouncing them on the local television all day long. But the important point, business as usual in the heart of American capitalism stopped. And there was nothing the police or the mayor could do. It was another new tactic in a long string of original ways to get out of the efforts to stop or block this. Thousands of people on 4 hours' notice marauding through downtown Wall Street into the subway tunnels. Subways were stopped. Everywhere in New York City, people became aware that there's no business as usual if it's going to continue the way it has. It makes people like us, busy in New York City, very proud of what we're able to accomplish.
Mic check.
Mic check.
Just as we are deeply moved, and I should tell you this, deeply moved by the reality of Occupies elsewhere. It makes us in New York stronger, so we want to thank you, but they asked me to bring you the story of what happened in New York to strengthen you as well. So that's the first thing. The second thing, this is now a crisis in the economic system that has taught lessons, and those lessons are really important to get clear in our minds. We are now entering the 5th year of this economic crisis. The official beginning of according to the National Bureau of Economic Research that keeps these records, is December of 2007. So by next month, the first 4 years are over, and we're entering the 5th year. And there is no end in sight. None. In fact, if any one of several things that could happen, and that look like they're going to happen, do happen, then this crisis will get significantly worse. Things like the implosion of the euro and the whole crisis in Europe. Things like the slowing down in China, which is extremely dramatic over the last couple of years, and no one quite knows where it will go, and so on. So anyone who suggests to you, from a standpoint of economics, that we are in a recovery, or we are bottoming out, or there will be good times coming soon, is doing something for which there's a very good technical term in economics. Bullshit.
Just walk down Washington Street and you look in the stores, there's nobody in them.
Yes, among other things. That's right. We're having that problem across the United States. Next point. There are many temptations in a crisis of this sort that runs so long and hits and cuts so deeply. There are temptations to look at one or another actor in the drama and blame him or her. If you're on the right wing, well, you can blame poor people for taking mortgages they couldn't afford. Or you can decide it's immigrants that are taking jobs. Or you can decide fill in the blank. If you're on the left wing, that temptation also applies. You can get very angry at the Federal Reserve. I don't know where the bridge is.
It's over there.
Yeah, okay. You can decide it's the Federal Reserve, or you can get angry at Goldman Sachs, or I would like to urge you not to do that. To understand that each of the players in this economic system is playing by the rules of that system, doing what it is they're paid to do. The bankers are paid to make money, and right now that means don't lend to anybody because you can't trust anyone. So you hold the money. And we can yell at the bankers from here to tomorrow. That's what they do because that's what they're paid to do. And the government officials the same, and the corporate directors the same, and the working people the same, and the government politicians the same. When everybody plays according to the rules of the game, and the game's results are awful, then the problem is the game. It's the system. And it's hard for people in our country to get their hands and their eyes and their ideas around that. It's easier to point the finger at a bad guy. I understand that. And there are plenty of bad guys to go around. But that's not our problem. If we arrest the head of Mr. Blankfein, if we had the chairman of Goldman Sachs, the next one who'll be a chairman is going to do the same thing because the same pressures and the same demands are on him or her who comes next. It may feel good to see them behind bars, but it isn't going to change the problem that brings us here. It is a system, and we here in the United States have to face something that's not flattering about us. For 50 years in this country, we could not question or criticize the system. We are proud as Americans that we regularly debate, is our transportation system working? Is our school system working? Last year we had a debate about whether our health system is working. That's possible. But to ask the question whether the economic system we have, capitalism is its name, whether that system is working, that's been a taboo. My profession, economics, isn't an analysis of how the economy works. Our departments don't do that. Our departments have a different function. Professional economics in the United States is engaged in the celebration of capitalism. The 400 ways which, if it was just allowed to work without interference, a dream, it would have wonderful results. Another dream. And students are immersed in a celebration. We could not ask the question, which we should have, is this institution working for us? And if it isn't, change it. And if you can't change it in a reasonable way, with a reasonable effort, then get another system. Learn that we ought to have been debating that for 50 years. Because we didn't, this system was able to function without criticism, without challenge. And when you have a system that doesn't get criticized or challenged for 50 years, Of course it doesn't work real well. It's had a free pass way too long. Let me explain. Right now, if I understand, one of the issues you're concerned with is deteriorating infrastructure all around you. You went to a bridge to make that point. Well, we could solve that problem if we had a rational economic system in 5 minutes. We have 25 million people, according to the government, without work. We have 1/3 of our industrial productive capacity not utilized. These are all government statistics. 25 million people with 1/3 of the tools, equipment, and machines they want to work with. If we put these two things together, if we had an economic system that could do it, the wealth we could produce in rebuilt bridges, in daycare for all the families that country need it, and 100 other things, we can do it. We have the wherewithal.
Mic check! Mic check! You guys, we have a GA. Guys, we have a GA. Right now. And it's really important that we have quorum for. It's really important that we have quorum for. Making decisions tonight. About legal matters.
That will fundamentally affect our future. We are invested in this movement. Get your ass to the GA right now.
Well, I ask you to tell me what you want me to do, because the last thing I want to do...
They won't be voting for another hour.
The GA will take an hour.
Yeah, it's okay. Keep going, please.
So we have an economic system that can't put the unemployed people who want to work with the unused material that is rusting and rotting because it isn't used to produce the wealth everybody agrees we need. An economic system that can't solve the most obvious problem to meet the needs we have is an economic system that at the very least ought to be challenged, criticized, and debated. And we live in a society that still cannot do that, is afraid to do that, or to be more honest and more correct. Until your movement, you have put it back on the agenda. And whatever happens from now on, the service you have rendered to this society by opening that question up, by having the courage to say this is a system that puts 99% of the people in one box and 1% of the people in the other in a way that is unacceptable ethically or morally or any other way, is a profound contribution to changing the way the issues are framed and changing the nature of the debate. It's long overdue, but it is a magnificent service that you are doing. The country is growing up. The Cold War is over, and we can finally now debate an economic system that does not work. As to what we should do in its place, let's have some courage. We know one thing. We know that there have been efforts over the last 150 years to make alternatives to capitalism and to make criticism. They have a name. You know the name. Socialism, communism, and so on. We know what they have achieved. We know that they have certain strengths, and we know that they have certain weaknesses. We'd like to build on the strengths. We'd like to avoid the weaknesses, and we've had bitter lessons to teach us about both of them. I would like to suggest that what an increasing number of us are focusing on as a new way to go might be something for you to think about as well in framing your strategies and the message you bring to people. One of the reasons that the old capitalism we live with doesn't work well is similar to the reasons why socialism and communism in a number of the cases like Russia and China didn't work so well either. That whatever the changes were made, whatever efforts were made to make a breakthrough to a better society, something was not done that needs to be done. And we have to learn the lesson. Here's what I mean, and I'm going to use the example of the United States. 75 years ago, we had a great economic crisis, even worse than the one we have now, or to be more accurate, even worse than we've had so far now. We don't know where it's going to go. 25% unemployment, a disaster. Millions of people got mobilized and reforms were produced. Social Security in the middle of the Depression was created. Unemployment insurance. Laws controlling business so they would have an outcome of the sort we wanted. A lot of reforms. But one thing was not done. No challenge to the organization of business. Major shareholders still picked a dozen folks to be a board of directors, and they made all the decisions for corporations. And in the 50 years since the Great Depression, those corporations never touched in their way of operating, used their profits they earned to undo every single reform that was achieved in the 1930s. The only major ones left, Social Security, is being dismantled as we speak tonight. And that will be announced in a few weeks when that super committee makes its report in Congress. We have to learn the lesson. If you don't change the structure of capitalist corporations, they will undo such reforms as we are able to achieve. In the Soviet Union and China, similarly, they nationalized the property. They substituted planning for markets. What they did not do is change the organization of production. Instead of a private board of directors, you had government officials. The lesson in both cases is the same. If you want to make a lasting change, you have to build the institutional basis to secure that change. You have to reorganize business, enterprises, so that the workers themselves who come to work 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, not only do the tasks of production, but also perform all the leadership functions. It's finally called the democratization of enterprise, the democratization of work. Democracy beyond the neighborhood where we live and vote and into the workplace where we spend most of our adult lives. And let me conclude this way. If workers ran the businesses of the United States, here's some things that would have happened differently. Starting in the 1970s, would workers have moved production out of this country to other parts of the world? No. Since the 1970s, wages in America are flat. Look at any statistic, you'll see. The real wage of an American worker in 1977 is about what it is today. No change. That's why Americans had to borrow so much. The only way to keep up the American dream was to borrow to buy it. Most Americans had no credit cards in the 1970s. That's a new invention to give Americans the ability to become heavily in debt. All students now come through school acquiring tens of thousands of dollars of debt. We didn't do that before. That's a change. If the American working class had run the enterprises, would they have stopped in the 1970s the rise in real wages of Americans, which had been 150 years in the making prior to that? The answer is not a chance. Would workers have chosen to use toxic machinery that polluted their children's lives, that polluted their, or would they have made a different decision? If the board of directors in New York doesn't give a damn about the toxic machines in Iowa, the people in Iowa, if they have to make those decisions, would make them differently. In short, our economic existence would be completely different, and the reforms we might achieve would be secure if the people themselves made the kinds of decisions that we have left way too long in the hands of people who have proven to us that the normal ways of capitalism and its business operations produce for us what? The greatest crisis in all of your lifetimes. This is a system, each time it has had a crisis, starting with Roosevelt and including Obama, the president has said, I've got these policies, you see, and if you let me do them, not only will I get us out of this crisis, but, pregnant pause, but I will also make sure we never have a crisis like this again. By that standard, every president has been a liar. Every president has been a failure. We just have to do something, finally, to bite the bullet, to ask and answer the question, is there a way better than this capitalist arrangement for enterprises to function? To have the nerve to say, hey, once upon a time we all expected to live under a king. And then a time came when we said, we don't want the king. And then we were told, what do you mean? You can't live in a society without a king. Somebody has to tell you what to do. And then the king, through mechanisms I don't want to discuss, lost his head. And we had instead government by people, more or less. Guess what? Disaster didn't fall, civilization didn't end. Second example I like to give. Once upon a time it was thought when you get to be a teenager and you start thinking about having a family yourself, you gotta find a mate. And that has to be done by your mother and your father because you're too young, you don't know. And then a time came when the young people said to the old people, thank you very much for your advice, we can manage this problem just ducky fine on our own. civilization didn't come to an end. I got an idea for us all. If the workers take over the enterprise, guess what? The world doesn't end, production doesn't collapse. It's not over. It's a different system, and it'll give us a better chance to avoid the absurdities of capitalism. Rational working people would never allow millions to be without work, huge quantities of tools, equipment, and raw materials to sit there rotting so we don't produce the wealth that we all need. That lunacy is capitalism's normal way of operating. It is absurd, and the human race should be able to have the courage to say, we can do better than capitalism. In Germany, my last point, I promise. In Germany, 5 or 6 years ago, a new political party was born. It took a funny name, called itself Die Linke, the left, just in case people were wondering where it was politically. So they called themselves the left. In the last national election, they got 11.9% of the vote. 1 out of 8 Germans votes for a party, one of whose basic slogans is, Germany can do better than capitalism. Don't let anyone tell you that the mass of the American people are all that different from the mass of the German people. Give Americans a chance to see and hear an alternative like this, not one that gives all power to the government, but one that begins at the base of society by reorganizing the stores, the offices, and the factories where we work. To give all of us 2 job descriptions always, not one. The particular task we do, but also a democratic participation in designing, in making decisions about what to produce, how to produce, where to produce, and what to do with the profits. Our education system will change because we'll all have to be products of a good education system that teaches leadership. No more, the difference between the leaders and the followers in business are not that different from the difference between masters and slaves. It is time for the slavery of a modern system, disguised by official freedom, to be thrown over, just as we overthrew the old slavery. It's just a matter of courage. And a final personal note. I've been a professor of economics all my adult life. I'm still a professor of economics. In the last 18 months, where I have been saying these sorts of things, I have done more public speaking on radio and television than in the previous 45 years of my life combined. And here's the difference. I did some public speaking before, but I always had to couch what I had to say in softer terms that American audiences could tolerate. It's a little bit like having a really interesting cuisine from another part of the world that dares not use its normal spices because Americans don't want to push beyond ketchup. Okay? The reality is I can now say what I've said to you. Capitalism is the problem, and getting beyond it is the solution. And I can't handle the audiences I have. I don't have the time to respond to the invitations I get, and others are like me. You've already proved with these Occupy movements that the number of people in this country who are sympathetic to what you're saying, numbers in the tens of millions of people. You're not alone. You're not isolated. The effort of the media to suggest that everybody thinks like Newt Gingrich, except for you and me, that's over. That's over. It's now clear that somebody has lost the headline. That's called the Tea Party. And somebody has gained the headline. That's you. And everything is changing in this society because you're making real and possible a movement of genuine change. Not cosmetic, not this little adjustment, not that, but a real fundamental change in what life will be. And if I have any hope, it's that in this century, the 21st century, there will be a new kind of movement that has as one of its foundations to finally complete the democratic project, to bring democracy beyond the neighborhood and the politics into the core of the economic system. Without economic democracy, political democracy remains the sham and the formality that we all know, if we're honest, it is. If people are going to participate in politics, they first have to be able to participate in a meaningful way in the thing that takes most of their life. 5 days a week, 9 to 5, That's what most of our adult lives are. If we don't have democracy there, then the rest of it is going to be phony. And that's been our experience. Politics in America is controlled by money, as your movement has shown. But the fundamental reason is that that's the way this economic system apportions wealth. That's the way this economic system crushes the mass of people into a need to work absurd numbers of hours just to get by. Who the hell has the time to get involved in politics? And if you can't participate meaningfully, then why learn about it? And then we have the atrophy of mass participation that we all see around us, and why the majority of us don't vote in the first place. To change this, then, we have to go to the base of this system, challenge, criticize, offer alternatives to this classical way in which we all march into subordinate positions in an economic system that then tells us what to do and controls our lives, makes us angry with one another, when what we should do is gather together the way you're doing and point the finger at a system that has outlived its historic usefulness. And like other systems, you say, thank you for what you gave us, but now you're not helping us move forward, you're dragging us down. And that's the time to break, and not to be overwhelmed or dissuaded by all the voices of those whose personal interests lie in keeping a dead system going, or are too afraid or too intimidated to become part of a movement for change. That's what you're not. You've had the strength to do it. And I can assure you that the impact of this Occupy movement in the short 2 months that it's been alive is stupefying everybody. There's no comparable history of the United... We've never had this before. We haven't had a movement in 2 months that changes the national discourse. That is unbelievable. Not only that, in a half a century, we haven't had a movement that's been courageous enough to say at the beginning, we're upset about the distribution of wealth and power, and we mean it. We're not just interested in this particular problem or that, and you're not going to break us up into a movement about that versus a movement about that and then get us competing for scarce resources. No, you said. You're not going to get us to list this issue or that. We are the 99, and we're going to assemble everything. It's brilliant, and it's working beautifully. Don't be dissuaded. No one has the right to say to you, your politics are wrong, your direction is wrong. You're doing better than anybody who could advise you, which is a good reason not to take the advice. You'll have to teach those of us that are older, not that you won't make mistakes, of course everybody does. You will have yours, and you will learn from yours. But everybody who pays attention in this country is noticing that something has fundamentally shifted here, and not only in America, but all over the world, the eyes are here. Because if the capitalism in America can be challenged and questioned, then capitalists everywhere are getting very nervous. And the impact of what you're doing is everywhere. So I don't mean to be a cheerleader, but I am one, and I'm enjoying it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for coming.
By the way, not to be self-promoting, but I do have a website, and if you're interested in any of these analyses, and I've only given you a smattering, please go to the website. That's why we maintain it. It's available. It costs nothing. There's a huge amount of material on there, so please take advantage of it at any time, and I have somewhere here.
Any questions?
Yes, please. Any questions?
What about creativity? To build a new society with creativity, to invent new windmills and new stuff.
Sure. I mean,
more highly efficient.
all of those things have to be done, and all of those things should be done, and we have the mechanisms for doing them. The only issue is you have to make a system that is able to take advantage of all the opportunities. Why aren't we taking 5 of the 25 million people who want to work and put them to work doing something useful that we can all, in 10 minutes, make a list of those things, whether it's greening America or transforming our transportation system or all the other things. We don't have any lack of good things to do.
Right.
Even in the 1930s, when it was only done half-heartedly, we took let me finish. We took huge numbers. In case you don't know the history, In the 1930s, in the Great Depression, it was a different situation. You're doing what was then done. You're building a movement. In those days, the movement was built by something called the CIO, the Congress of Industrial Organizations, the Socialist and the Communist Party, who were strong in the United States at that time. They mobilized people. They forced the government, Roosevelt, who came in as a balanced budget, like a Republican, they forced him to change. And he created and filled 11 million jobs between 1934 and 1941. At today's population, that would be a program of 22 million jobs. That would take care of most of our unemployment. What did they do with those people? I'll give you two examples. The first ecological program in our country, the Civilian Conservation Corps, which reclaimed land, which re-diverted rivers. He put lots of people to work building the national parks that Americans have been visiting with their families for decades. He created the WPA. He made a system where all unemployed artists, singers, poets, actors, sculptors, dancers, were put into troops and hired by the government to bring culture across America. Large and small towns had visiting sculpting classes for their children. There was more cultural life in America in the 1930s than there had ever been before, and then there has ever been since. Those were creative uses of the government. It gave people who were unemployed a job. It gave them an income so they could stay in their homes and not lose them. It gave them a dignity of being a useful citizen, and it gave the country the results of all they produced. That was a minimally rational approach. The amazing thing about this country today, not only is Obama not doing it, they're not even proposing it. There is no discussion. It's as if our own history had been erased from the American people. But that's a problem of a system that has spent the last 40 years undoing, erasing even what was accomplished, mediocre as it was. It was something. We're not even doing that now. It's a further indictment. You must change a system. Otherwise, we all will be facing, or rather, not me, you all will be facing grandchildren who will be looking at you to explain why you didn't do more, just as I'm now asking us to face the mistake made by those good folks in the 1930s who couldn't take that last step, who couldn't have a feeling for democracy that said it has to happen in the workplace because that's the foundation of any real democracy anywhere else.